Welcome, everybody. We're here today with MSL Capita, and we're going to be talking about the rise of women in sports. And so, really, when we talk about MSL Capita, just to give you a brief background, is we're trying to uplift and upskill coaches in terms of how do we create the most impact and how do we follow our student athletes beyond their sporting career to not necessarily make them a better athlete, but make them a better person. And really, how do we do that is by focusing on the coach. We don't often focus enough on the coach, and that's why we're here today, is giving you that opportunity to really work on yourself and do some self-reflection, as well as move forward with some of the work that we're going to kind of put in front of you today. So before we kind of get started, just our quick kind of background is we really want to be the coach that players want to play for and win for, right? We can't have a successful team without a successful culture and that establish that culture of what it means to be a part of that team. And so a lot of things go into that, and today is no different. And that's kind of why we're talking about the rise of women in sports. So, first of all, I want to introduce myself. Me being Davis Turner, and I'm kind of like the senior director of strategic programs at Mindspark Learning. And we're gathered here and with two other of my colleagues today too. So I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. Great to see you all. My name is Victoria James. I'm the Director of Professional Learning at Mindspark, and I'm excited and passionate about this topic.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad I could be here. I'm Virginia Kemp. I'm a student in residence with Mindspark.
Awesome. Thank you. And Victoria, if you don't mind, we can start off in our first little section.
Yeah, thank you, Davis. So we are going to go ahead and engage in a virtual cohort icebreaker. So obviously, if you're watching the recording, we still ask you to just take a few moments to consider first one of your most memorable moments as either a player or a coach. And you can just take a second to think about this. I know we probably have many that we want to draw from that stand out. But again, just consider for a moment, what was one of your most memorable moments as either a player or a coach? And typically we would move into breakout rooms to share these responses aloud. And Davis, I'll defer to you if you want us to go ahead and answer these prompts as a group together, or if we want to just save this for independent reflection.
Yeah, we'll go into breakout rooms real quick. So I'll start the timer and you guys can jump back in when time is up, and we'll kind of actually just bring you in. So, okay. Britannia, do you want to share any experiences?
Sure. Yeah, I have one experience that came to mind immediately. It was a long time ago. I'm not that old, but it was a while ago. I won MVP my senior year for our varsity volleyball team, and it was so amazing. I was like, what, MVP? That's so amazing. And then I was I kind of had to reassure myself. I was like, okay, I worked hard. I was captain. I led our team into regionals. I was like, I deserve this, my team, but this is a team award. We're all MVP. So that was a great moment for me.
That's awesome. I mean, and I think, definitely individual accolades and stuff like that definitely play a part in why people continue to play the sport, right? You get noticed and recognized for not necessarily just being the top performer or anything like that, but like you said, you're a team captain, right? You have peers that respect that too. And obviously you're a team player in terms of that. And so being that most valuable player, whether it be, you might have had the highest scoring or the most points, whatever, in the season or each game, but to notice that everybody is kind of looking at you as a leader, right, is a little bit different and almost more fulfilling and earning that award beyond just that leadership role too, which I think is pretty sweet. Victoria, do you have anything that you want to share?
I mean, there's so many memories. Maybe see if I could pick one. Perhaps when I coached girls soccer, also at the same school that Virginia was on the volleyball team and a student at, and some students were a bit hesitant to use the ball, use their head to trap the ball, do headers and things, and ultimately, we got them to the point where they not only knew how to do the move correctly, but also feel more comfortable, feel more confident, and and their ability to engage in that aspect of the sport. And there was just one day where we finally had a breakthrough, and it just was a great way to see them kind of step out of their comfort zones and be able to guide them in that way.
Yeah, it's almost like it's cool to see that foundational knowledge and building upon that and just seeing like those aha moments. And that's, I mean, that's all you want, especially not even like as a teacher, as a coach, as a parent, whatever, all those types of things and those moments just make everybody kind of have that breath of relief and be like, oh my gosh, we're capable of so much more than we ever thought. And just kind of going from there. And it's pretty amazing to see those pieces in action, especially when it's more than one person at a time, even if it is just an individual and they've been working at something. But as a group or as a whole group or team, it's even that much more powerful. So and I think that's, you know, partially the reason why we all become coaches is we want to share that knowledge and have those aha moments and have that fulfilling kind of feeling again to get to that point. So as we kind of move forward, coming from Zoom backgrounds and everything like that, we really want to focus on, if you want to share any ideas or if you want to have anybody kind of jump in or jump into the chat, please feel free. We're here to answer any questions, or if you have any opinions and share any, you know, any insight that you guys have, we're definitely going to be available. So we've been in Zoom and kind of this whole Zoom lifestyle for a while, so please feel free to use it. And if you have any questions or if you need any help, please ask myself, Victoria, or Tanya. Today, we're really focused on the rise of women in sports, and not necessarily only the specific athletes or anything like that, but we're talking about the rise in, you know, the publicity, right? We have a lot of different organizations working on it. We have the WNBA, the National Women's Soccer League coming out, big league, the NWHL. All these different leagues are coming out into professional kind of sports and almost into the new vision of what broadcasting and women's sports has become. And so even though there is high numbers and huge numbers of women participating in sports, they still get very little television coverage or, you know, anything on blogs or ESPN or Bleacher Report, whatever. They're still getting very little kind of notoriety in terms of that media coverage. So we're here to kind of not only dispel that, but also trying to figure out how we can promote women in more leadership roles. So even though we have huge numbers of females in sport, few of them go on to become coaches. And that's what we're trying to work on and really address today and through some of the work that we're coming up in MSL Capita's future. So we'll kind of get to that at the end, but really focusing on how we can get these women that are actually still playing into more leadership roles and really finding their voice and finding who they are in terms of that leadership within themselves. And kind of like what Britannia was saying and how she, you know, almost recognized herself as that MVP and the captain of the team too, and just like, I earned this, I deserve this. So obviously we're going to be a part of that and kind of discussing that in more detail.
So moving forward, we know that there are many, many incredible athletes in the world today who are doing amazing things. Plenty of them also happen to be women and young girls. So we just want to highlight a few of the top competitors in the world today in sports, one of which is Koko Goff. So she is the youngest player ranked in the top 100 by the Women's Tennis Association. And Goff won her first WTA singles title at the 2019 Linz Open at the age of 15. So that was the age of my 9th grade students when I taught 9th grade English several years ago, which made her the youngest singles and title holder on the WTA tour since 2004. She rose to prominence with an upset, you may recall, over Venus Williams in the opening round at Wimbledon in 2019. So she is an example of an incredible competitor and an extremely amazing rising star in the tennis world that we wanted to just highlight and speak to.
Yeah, and Megan Rapinoe, I mean, huge star for the U.S. women's team and a huge proponent in equity and pay. And I think, you know, she's not only has she become a unbelievable soccer player, but she's become an unbelievable voice for equity in sport. And so she kind of led the way in terms of how do we get women a larger voice and kind of that justice, that social justice piece in terms of equal pay for women comparatively to the men. right? Even though their lawsuit failed, she kind of rose up to the challenge of saying, like, we need to do something about it. And she rose awareness to a lot of these issues. And so it's not necessarily the lawsuit. I definitely agree. Like, there's a huge proponent, we need to fix this. But the fact that she was able to stand up and say, I'm going to voice this opinion. We need to start somewhere, and we need to make that first step. That's where it all begins, right? So not only is she kind of inspiring from her athletic performance, but her social justice and kind of like equitable reform kind of voice. And so we really needed to think about what gender bias has done to us as coaches, as people, and so on, and really think about what they're really arguing for and what the purpose is, and why they're fighting and standing up for kind of this oppressive gender bias that has existed in so many long for so long systematically. So I think Megan Rapinoe is definitely more prominent than even her stats can share, even though she definitely is one of I think a Golden Boot winner, as well as, a huge piece and a part of the team captains of the U.S. women's teams as well.
So we've looked at tennis, we've looked at soccer. Now we see that we have another incredible athlete who represents the United States in snowboarding. Her name is Chloe Kim. At the 2018 Winter Olympics, she became the youngest woman to win an Olympic snowboarding gold medal when she won gold in the women's snowboard halfpipe, again, at just 17. So as you've noticed, these individuals that we've highlighted not only represent women and are top competitors in their sport, but also they're quite young and are a symbol of leadership and bravery and excellence to all young athletes, I think, today in the US and around the world.
No, I think you bring a great point, especially with that, Victoria, is like, we notice that these young stars or rising stars are all becoming that kind of voice, right? They're using and leveraging this platform to kind of speak to how important women are to sport. And I think especially Simone Biles, who's one of the most decorated Olympians and national gymnasts of all time, and probably the greatest ever. And witnessing this today is just amazing. And what I think is so powerful about her, but all these young women, is that they do stand up and they do speak out and they say, I'm going to, be the voice of the unspoken or the unheard, and really kind of say, just like Simone Biles has just recently dropped her affiliation with Nike, so she can go to Athleta for social justice, and she can speak her mind on social justice issues of what's happening. So they're giving that, kind of bringing the power back to themselves and saying, these organizations and these companies and these people aren't going to restrict who I am based off of this contract that I have. And I think we've been so almost immune or kind of just blind to what has happened previously, and kind of keeping those people quiet in terms of, because they have this contract or they're under contract with these larger organizations. So I think when it comes to gender equity and gender bias, it's really powerful to say, I'm going to be with somebody that allows me to speak my voice and who I am. And so if Athleta is going to do it, if Nike's going to do it, if Under Armour is going to do it, follow that kind of lead and allow your student athletes to kind of follow that too. And I think who we are as coaches and who we are as people, allowing our athletes to speak their mind and speak their truths, is really going to help build that not only relationship with them, but help us as coaches understand, who do I have on my team and how do I build that strong relationship to better coach them, to better understand how I can make them succeed in the future beyond just the sport alone.
Yes. So we've only looked at just a few of the world's and the nation's top performing athletes. Again, Koko Goff, Megan Rapinoe, Chloe Kim, and Simone Biles. But what about their coaches? Why don't these incredible athletes' coaches get the same mainstream recognition as, say, Bill Belichick or Nick Saban? So throughout our session today together, we are going to explore this question further and make moves to understand how to start promoting women in sports leadership ranks.
So what we're going to do next is, in the chat, I'm going to paste a Google form, and it's really kind of focused on the gender equity audit. And what you're going to do is really answer this truthfully, and it's all anonymous, but we really want you to focus on the questions and think about which questions are going to stand out to you and so on. But take this, be honest. We're going to give you 10 minutes, so take your time. It shouldn't take all 10 minutes, but we just still want to give you enough time to really think and kind of percolate over some of these responses. So we'll give you that time, and then we'll come back and kind of discuss some of these questions. All right, welcome back, everybody. So hopefully you had enough time to discuss or think about, those questions in that gender equity audit, and really focus on who you are and how you see yourselves within this system, your organization, within your personal life, and within your community. And I think it's really important to ask these questions, not necessarily just today, but how did you feel about this in the past? How do you feel about this in the future? And really, do you feel like what you're facing now is what people faced in the past? Or even, are they going to continue to face this? And how do we act as a change if we do see that? So in the breakout rooms, I really want you to focus on some of these questions and how we ask them, but also what questions stuck out to you and why, and what did the audit make you feel? How did you respond to some of these questions? Did you feel like you were being completely honest with yourself? And then if not, then why did you start questioning yourself? Did you start thinking about specific instances and so on that really brought up through some of these questions that really made you upset or anything like that? So in breakout rooms, we'll give you a chance to discuss, and then we'll kind of come back together and talk about your responses.
All right, so moving forward, we are going to share an incredible video clip with you all produced by the New York Times around this topic, the rise of women in sports and the representation, as well as access and equity issue. So it's about 7 minutes. So as we watch, your thinking job is to consider your organizational context. So where do you see yourself reflected in the conversations and examples cited in the video here?
From the end zone to the locker room, he pushes you to be your best.
Being perfect is not about that scoreboard out there.
He shows you how to dig deep and beat the odds.
We shut them down because we can.
He's a leader who takes his team to the limit and to victory.
Hey, women coach too.
Here we go!
They call me Hutch. They don't call me Coach Hutch, they just call me Hutch.
I'm Meredith. I was a Division I soccer player, and I have 20 years of coaching experience across all different levels.
I'm Coach Eddie, and I'm the only woman coaching Division I men's basketball.
College sports is a $14 billion industry with only a handful of female head coaches who are basically like CEOs running their teams.
In men's sports, only 3% of head coaches are women.
But even in women's sports, we only coach 42% of the teams. Across all of Division I sports, only 1 in 4 head coaches are women.
It's time for change.
I was a young kid in the 60s and early 70s. We didn't have varsity sports for women. I was a cheerleader. All I ever wanted to do was get to play. And Title IX brought out the fact, if it's good for young men, why wouldn't it be good for young women? It was a 1972 amendment that guaranteed that there could be no discrimination based on gender by any federally funded institution. I went to Michigan State University and I played basketball and softball there. We didn't have a good space to play. We had leaky roof and warped floors. We didn't have a locker room. At some point it really hit us in the face that we deserve to be treated just as well as the boys, not better. And we filed a lawsuit and we won in an hour. In the late 70s, which is when I went to college, well over 90% of all women's sport teams were coached by women. Now it's somewhere closer to 40%. So you could say the decline is drastic.
Title IX did exactly what it was supposed to do. It got more girls playing. Title IX asked for participation. It didn't ask for coaching.
We're moving backward in gender equity in coaching. In other fields, they're making advancements.
Where have all the women gone? And why are the opportunities going to men? As the opportunities improved, we saw a lot more of the other gender going into our coaching pools.
Notre Dame head coach Muffet McGraw is coaching in her 9th Final Four today.
When you look at men's basketball and 99% of the jobs go to men, why shouldn't 100 or 99% of the jobs in women's basketball go to women?
I'm a big fan. I just got to meet her recently of Muffet McGraw.
Men have the power. Men make the decisions. And when these girls are coming out, who are they looking up to tell them that that's not the way it has to be? And where better to do that than in sports?
I think there is a place for men in our game. All I'm suggesting is that we should have a pretty strong representation of women in leadership positions in everything. You're not going to dream it unless you can see it.
I started playing professional basketball. I played in the WNBA for the LA Sparks and the Phoenix Mercury. And then after that, I decided that I wanted to coach. Najee, you with me? I heard a lot of no's. I got 10 years of no's, actually. I really want to be a collegiate head coach. I hope that there's an athletic director that has the courage to not see me as a woman, but just see me as a qualified coach.
Years ago when we were looking for a men's basketball coach, and it was mentioned to me by, of course, one of our administrators, and the comment was, we're going to get the best one out there. And at the time, Pat Summitt was alive and well, the winningest coach in all of college basketball, men or women's. Coached, I believe, 8 national championships at Tennessee. And I said, are we going to interview Pat Summitt? And of course, I got a big laugh, like, that's funny. And I was dead serious.
To all the people that think that women can't coach as well as men, try me. What we're doing here at the University of Maine, which is really, really special, is empowering these young men to have the confidence to work with strong alpha women. When they go into the workforce, they're going to work with women.
We've seen a little bit of the needle moving. We've seen some of the women in Major League Baseball has hired some women as hitting coaches. You've seen the NBA. Becky Hammond certainly broke that ceiling. We're not there yet. We're still evolving.
We're supposed to fit in and walk the walk, but we have to do it in this really particular way that doesn't necessarily ruffle feathers.
Double standards, you see it all the time.
If there's a bad call in our game, and I run out there and I get in the umpire's face, basically I'm emotional. Jim Harbaugh is our football coach.
Frustration building for Harbaugh.
In a football game, when there's a bad call, and Jim Harbaugh gets in that ref's face and throws his headset, and people say he's passionate, he's intense, he's just leading his men.
Look at here, look at here.
Jim Boeheim is livid, and I don't blame him.
If you look at male coaches who have been released from their jobs, whether it be for not winning, cheating, they resurface, they get other jobs. When a woman loses her job, she is branded and marked as no good.
Sports are no different from business or politics, tech, you name it. It starts at the top.
People hire people who they're comfortable with.
Male boards in business hire male CEOs. And in sports, male athletic directors hire male coaches. And 89% of Division I athletic directors are men. The research shows that diversity leads to success. That means hiring only men is leaving titles on the field.
The only way change is going to happen is if organizations and institutions hire more women.
University presidents should set a target and make it public so that they're held accountable.
It's not rocket science.
Women are all great enough to play the game. Women are great enough to coach the game.
I do love that video just because of how prominent some of those coaches are, right? And they bring up such valid points in terms of leadership roles. And I think when we look at athletic participation, as we mentioned earlier in this session, is we oftentimes just think of Title IX as being that participation piece. And it goes so much beyond that, right? Like, how do we get these athletes to realize their potential as leaders, right? How do we cultivate them from that younger age, saying, you can be a coach, right? You can take this leadership role, you can take this responsibility and take on the team or be that team captain. And then what else can you do from those skills that you have? And so I think we have to be explicit in how we coach our young athletes, especially young women, in terms of what are we doing to provide them with leadership access? What are we doing to motivate them to be, a leader at the next level beyond the sport or beyond just their own kind of existence on the team? So is this a pathway that they can take? Is this something beyond in their career that they can take away from this? And I think as not only athletic directors and coaches and so on, we have to be very, I guess, explicit and determined to make that happen and really bring up those conversations on a pretty regular basis in terms of what success looks like for a female in this type of role. Oftentimes, females, I'm going to say this stereotypically, so I apologize if this comes off the wrong way, but females only see themselves in other leadership roles if they're led by a female. So they want to see themselves in that position of power. And so if they don't see that, if they don't see themselves as a coach, or if they're only coached by men, they're not going to think of themselves as this is a trajectory, this is a position I can fill. So being able to have that representation and that mentorship and having that opportunity to see themselves in those leadership roles, that's what's going to motivate them. So we need to continue to hire and think about female coaches, not only for our teams now, but for our next generation. And so how do we inspire that next generation, our athletes now, to become those coaches of the future, to become those female leaders in business, to become those next female CEOs and entrepreneurs, to move just past and move that needle beyond what's already stereotypically happening in sports. And that's just that participation piece. So I think when we talk about females in that leadership role, right? Like we oftentimes, even though we mentioned this, or the video mentioned this too, they had a great statistics. And we think about at one point in the 1970s, right, we were almost at 90% of females coaching D1 sports. And so when we think about even now, it's down to 42, and this is all Division I athletics. But when we think about as the whole organization of sports together and youth sports and so on, only 25% of teams are coached by females. And so that means 75% of coaches are male, whether it be a female sport or a male sport. And so that is detrimental to see that mentorship or that leadership piece. And oftentimes when we talk to, coaches, is if you can name, coaches that inspire you, your top 10 coaches, many of them are going to list male figures. But when we think about, if I were to ask, can you name, 10 female coaches, right, beyond your community or whatever, top 10 female coaches in any sport, that's a much harder ask on society than it is to say the Bill Belichick's, the Nick Sabans, the Phil Jacksons of the world. And so you say it's very hard to do this, but we have to continue that conversation. We have to continue saying, why not? Why is it, that they're at the top? And how do we get women a better placement there? I can probably list on my hand of how many female coaches that I can list off of. So I'm even to blame, and I know that, and I'm trying to do my best to be better at understanding that. But at the same time, we need to prove to ourselves as a society and as organization, putting positions of power and opening them up to females and head coaches, as well as athletic directors too.
All right, so we here at MindSpark represent a couple of different coaching experiences. I'll start us off. I was an athlete for about 13 years, played competitively girls soccer, and then coached as well high school girls soccer at a previous school that I taught at in Maryland. And when I reflect back on that experience, I just want to speak to the fact that not only did we work on the technical skills on the field how to receive the ball, how to pass the ball, how to use different parts of the foot to strike the ball, to angle it a certain way, to score a goal, how to communicate on the field. But I think just as important from my experiences, I saw young players, young athletes, ability to develop, their confidence and their communication skills were equally important to that experience. I noticed that perhaps right in the hallways, maybe initially students were sharing classes together, but maybe didn't have the strongest relationship. By the end of that season, everybody was extremely close because that's what sports does. It brings people together. It builds those bonds that maybe don't always happen quite as organically between different social groups across different lines of difference in society, out in the world, or in classrooms. So that is just a small recollection from my time coaching girls high school soccer. And Davis, I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, and yeah, kind of going into my background too is, I'm a hockey player by heart and by trade, but when I went to school, played hockey since I think second or first grade, so really young. I was able to get a D1 scholarship and play for a little bit until concussions caught up with me and I had to medically retire. But after that, I knew that coaching was in my blood, right? I knew because education was there and I knew that I loved teaching and I loved doing that. It was an easy jump and it was easy kind of transition because in college, that's exactly what I wanted to do. I knew that I couldn't play and I wanted to coach. And I was always, considered a captain of my team, or I was always wearing either the letter A or the letter C on my jersey. But at the same time, when I went back to coach, I realized it was much more difficult to coach than I originally thought, right? Like it took some time to understand how coaching differs from playing. And you can't just jump in and you can't just say like, oh, this is fine. I know the sport, this makes me a good coach, right? You have to understand motivational techniques. You have to understand people and relationships. And I think, one of the things that when I jumped into coaching, I started off coaching boys and I was like, I'm not going to say anything bad necessarily, but they were kind of jerks, right? They thought they had all these egos that got in their way. They were always the best person on the ice, no matter what it was. I switched over to coaching Tier 1 AAA girls at the U16 level, and it was night and day, right? It was an amazing thing to see, how much more coachable females are because they had that team and relationship mentality. They understood, that it's a team game and not an individual sport most of the time. And really, they were very coachable. And that's what made it so much more exciting for me to coach, females comparatively to males because the ego didn't get in the way. And that's based off my experience. But I didn't want myself to be that role model necessarily. I wanted to be an ally in terms of coaching and female empowerment, but I also did not want to be that role model for the females. And so as they move through some of these coaching tiers, you'd see other females at the higher level or other females at the younger level, but a lot of times it was a lot of a male dominated field in coaching. So how do we get, who we coached to see themselves there, and how do we continue to empower them? And so that I kind of stepped away from that team just because, not necessarily thinking that it was not the right position for me, and not necessarily because of that reason, but because of other things going on in my life at the time and so on. But Britannia, I'm going to pass it over to you because I know you have a pretty unique experience too.
Yeah, so personally, I'm a dancer and I retired, I guess, volleyball player. But I had the opportunity to coach both dance and volleyball, and it was the best experience ever. Going from a dancer and a player to teaching both of these amazing sports. It really brought me joy, being able to be in that place of leadership and, inspire and motivate my students and my players to show them that, they're capable of doing anything. And I felt like as a girl, they felt like, okay, I can come to her and she'll understand. And, I was able to relate with them and share my own experiences and get them through everything, whether it was athletically, with building up all those skills and everything, or, on a personal level where they had problems in school or they wanted to talk something out. It was really great being able to build those lifelong bonds with them. My dance students still call me to this day about like school things and dance things and all types of things. And yeah, a deep love for my students and my players.
No, and I love that you said that, right? Like people still want to connect and call and talk to you, because I think it's so important too, because when we think about coaches, oftentimes we think that coaches stop at the end of practice, or coaching stops at the end of the game or whatever, but they mean so much more to these athletes than just the games, the practices, and so on. They are those life mentors, and they are those people that people look up to, and sometimes more than their coaches, more than their teachers, or more than their parents. And I think that's the power that we have as coaches, because we see that vulnerable state. In competition, people are vulnerable, right? They fail on a regular basis. And so being able to fail in front of somebody and then get back up and try it again, you know that you have to motivate them, and you know you have to get to them on a relationship level or a deeper level to really get the most out of them. And so I think as players, you see that, and as players, you want to play and win for that coach that gets the most out of you. And you feel vulnerable when you do fail, and you feel vulnerable when you say, I can't do this, and somebody else helps motivate you through. And I think that's where that team aspect comes in as well, and just being able to understand and identify some of those elements of yourself too. So as we kind of move forward, though, I think we're really focusing on what that means to be a leader, right? And how do we get more females involved in it? And it's pretty powerful. And so I think Carol Hutchins is a great example, and she's very outspoken in terms of making sure there's equity and equality within sport, right? I think this quote is very, very important to see, because it definitely speaks to it, right? It's very unjust and unfair in terms of how we treat the hiring process, how we treat women in sport. And I think we have a long way to go, but I think we need to be the ones that are pushing forward and pushing the boundaries in terms of getting more females in sport and getting them more leverage in terms of those leadership aspects and what is required and what it looks like. So one of those things that we look to as not necessarily as women and leaders, but leadership in general, right? It's how do we get the most out of our athletes? And I think when we are coaching, right, we want to fill that funnel. We want to get more women in coaching and leadership roles, because the statistics aren't lying, and they're not saying, oh, we're increasing women in this position, right? They're continually decreasing over years and decades of data. And that's the hard reality that we're trying to face, right? We're getting more athletes participating in sport, or more female athletes participating in sport, but we're also losing media coverage. We're also losing all that publicity in terms of that. And I think only 4% of media coverage is covering, female sports right now, which is abysmal, even though demographics are 50-50 essentially, right? 48% female and 52% male are watching sports, and 55% of males say they support and watch WNBA games and NWHL games. So it's the need and the want for female sports is there, but now how do we transition that into following a female lead? How do we get them to embrace this leadership role, not only in their organizations, but in their kind of self-reflection piece too, of saying they are equal, they are going to be more successful than I am, or they are more competitive than I am. I can attest to myself, I definitely had student athletes on my team that were going to be great coaches someday. Are they going to take that path? I don't know, but they're great mentors. And I know that if we nourished and kind of cultivated that, that's where we need to be. We need to bring them to that point of saying, you have these skills, now take this, bring it back to your team and show me how you can lead, right? And really be explicit with them, because they don't see that sometimes in themselves. And as a young student athlete, you want to hear that. You want to have that belief that people are there to represent you and to hold you accountable for some of these leadership skills. So some of these things that we really gather and get together for, what it takes to be a leader at the next level, especially not only in a coach, but how do we really reflect that as coaches or as athletic directors to our young female athletes, is some of the things listed on the screen here, right? Like making sure that, we view each other in terms of potential. A lot of times sports really have well, I did this, I did my part, and you didn't do it, and you didn't do your part, so it's not my fault that we lost, right? But leaders don't do that. They don't put the blame on things, and we have to be explicit on when we teach these things. We're oftentimes just teaching the games and either, getting upset with, a bad play or things like that, but we're never really praising or explaining and learning some of those other soft skills that really are prevalent in the game that can be translated to the workforce or can be translated to, a leadership role. So all these different things really take the next step in how we need to be more explicit in terms of elevating women in sports.
So with that, we know that this is a big topic, right? This is a really important issue that impacts so many of us and the ones that we love and the young people we care about. So what can we do, right? Start from where you are. We are going to engage in a little bit of brainstorming around some action steps that we can take to start to address this issue. So questions like, what is your organization doing currently to promote female leadership? How can you better implement some of these leadership skills that Davis just mentioned on the previous slide? How are you connecting to industry and other communities? And perhaps there are partnerships or industry connections that exist in your setting or your organization that maybe folks on your team, just learned about or just recently were forged. How might you, continue to invest in those and strengthen them to help promote that female leadership pipeline? And then lastly, what mentorship opportunities or programs are currently being offered in your setting or that you could potentially be taking advantage of? So we have a Jamboard that we are going to drop into the chat. And a Jamboard is a really cool virtual collaboration space that we love at MindSpark. It essentially offers us the chance to use essentially what we would use with maybe sticky notes and chart paper and markers, we can use with Jamboard. So I'll drop that link into the chat in just a moment. And once you click on that link in the chat, you will see that there are a couple pages with different sticky notes. And Davis, if you want to just guide us through it real quick, I'll demo it for us and how you can add your thinking to that Jamboard. So our first two questions are here. So what is your organization currently doing to promote female leadership? The way you add a sticky note to Jamboard is you take your cursor and you go ahead and go to the sticky note icon under the cursor. Click that icon and a sticky note will appear. You can type your response and then hit save and it populates onto the Jamboard, okay? Then if you decide you want to change it, you can double click and edit your response. If you need to delete it, just select it and click delete, okay? So we are going to spend, let's see, approximately 2 minutes engaging in this Jamboard brainstorm, all right? And this Jamboard will be up and we will keep it open for folks who may be engaged with this recording and want to participate as well later on. 2 minutes, here we go.
So as we kind of come back from that Jamboard and that activity, we think about some of those questions that we have lingering within our organizations. And as we kind of mentioned before, right, this quote really speaks to it. And I really think that even though we're really focusing on ourselves as coaches, we really need to think about sometimes how is our coaching being reflected and perceived, right? Are we actually talking about, what we're going to do? Are we going to be talking about this pathway of coaching for the next generation? How do we give back to the community that gave so much to us? And really, what has really shaped you into the person that you have become, and how can we help other young student athletes do the same? And I think sports has such a power, is such a powerful tool in order to do that. But we really need to still, like I've mentioned before, is nurture and cultivate that kind of mentality of what does it take to bring a leader out of the young female athletes, right? How do we get some of that group mentality and make this a little bit more individualistic and say, have that self-reflection and say, I can do this, I can be this leader, I can be somebody that steps up when the time needs to happen, and not necessarily right after they they stop competing, but maybe it is years down the road. Maybe it is something that they're passionate about and they still want to follow within college. There are coaching minors now, and there's sometimes even, I think there's even coaching majors now. So I think it's really productive in terms of how can we put people in those positions that they see and they can still continue to reflect back on and really allow themselves to have that mentor and to have that mentor-mentee relationship of, gender specific. We always need somebody that's kind of been there and been our shoes to really kind of move to that next step in our leadership as well.
All right. So with that, we would like to begin to close out with our connection circle question. So for a moment, take a moment to consider, name one thing you are taking away from today's presentation that you'll implement to build leadership capacity in your own team or organization. We've gone through a couple of credible examples of top athletes who also happen to also be quite young. That at the start of our presentation, we've looked at specific leadership skills that were sourced on the Leadership Gap by Lali Daskal. We've also engaged with personal narratives, right? Britannia and Davis and I shared our own experiences coaching young women and girls and how impactful and powerful that experience was. So name one thing you are taking away from today's presentation that you'll implement to build leadership capacity in your own team or organization, and feel free to drop that in the chat.
So as we wrap up today, so thank you again for joining us. It really means a lot that you guys are here to support this, as well as the work that we're talking about when it comes to rising women in sports. So as we kind of move forward, some other free clinics coming up, we have, connecting organizations to industry partners from traditional to non-traditional sports and understanding the trends, and then the hybridization of the multi-sport athlete. So those are all free clinics coming up in the next few months. Please kind of check out our website, register if you haven't already, and just kind of jump in and stay in the know. One other program that I really want to focus on that really lends itself well to this subject of rising women in sports is our collab that's launching in September of 2021. And really, with the partnership of the global community of women in high school sports, Girl Scouts of Colorado, and Our Precious Child, we're really going to focus on kind of the 6-month cohort and working on gender equity within sports organizations. So how can we uplift and empower females within leadership roles and females within the sport, but also getting our organization to have a more equitable lens as they move forward and into the future. So please join us. There's more information on our website. And it's really geared towards your problem of practice and individually working out some of the issues and barriers that you may have. So not necessarily here's an answer or a template. This is something that we work on individually and together, and we kind of facilitate your growth and development as an organization. So join us. The information's on our website. The link will be in the chat, and we hope to see you guys there. But please learn some more and reach out if you guys have any questions. So my email is davis@mindspark.org. As Victoria, is it say Victoria@mindspark.org, and Britannia is also Britannia@mindspark.org. So please feel free, if you have any questions, reach out. There's also a Google form for our survey in the chat as well. So please fill it out and let us know how we did and what other kind of content that we can help provide for you guys as we move forward in the future. All right, thank you guys.